The wind howled across the ruined city, carrying with it the smell of burned metal and dust. The war had ended months ago, but the ground still trembled from old explosions. In the middle of that silence, a small cry echoed through the broken streets. It was the sound of a starving alien child, weak and shaking, lying in his mother's thin arms. The alien mother's skin, once bright and silver, had turned pale gray from hunger. Her lips were cracked, her eyes red from crying. She whispered to her son, trying to keep him awake. "Please, my little one, stay with me, just stay a little longer." She had no food, no water, nothing left to give. For days she had walked through the wasteland, begging anyone who passed to help. But no one did. Her people had lost the war, and now they were treated like animals, slaves, forgotten things. Every time she saw humans, she lowered her head in fear. She knew they hated her kind. But that day, when she heard the sound of human boots and engines nearby, something inside her broke. She could not let her son die. Not like this. She stood in the middle of the cracked road, clutching her child tightly, and when the human convoy appeared through the dust, she dropped to her knees. She cried out, her voice trembling, "Take my life, please, just feed my son." The soldiers stopped for a moment, their armored trucks covered in red dust, helmets shining under the weak sun. One of them laughed and said, "Another one begging, move her aside." But one soldier didn't move. He was tall, his face hidden under a dirty helmet. His name was Elias. He looked down at the woman, then at the boy whose ribs showed under thin skin. He felt something inside his chest twist. He remembered the last time he saw a child like that. During the war, burned in crossfire, he had promised himself never again. The commander shouted, "Elias, get back in line, we have orders, leave her." But Elias didn't listen. He took a small food pack from his bag and walked toward the woman. The other soldiers stared, whispering, "What is he doing, helping an alien?" Elias knelt down, his shadow covering her from the sun. He opened the food pack and handed it to her slowly. The woman froze, her hands shaking. She whispered, Why would you help me?" Elias said softly, "Because he's just a child, and you're a mother." Tears rolled down her face as she fed her son tiny pieces. The boy licked her fingers weakly, and for the first time he smiled. The sight made Elias forget where he was, forget the uniform he wore. But then a voice behind him barked, "You've broken protocol, soldier, step away from the enemy." Elias turned to see his commander pointing a gun at him. He slowly stood, his hands raised slightly. "Sir, she's harmless, just trying to save her boy." The commander sneered, "They killed our people, they burned colonies, and you want to feed them?" Elias looked at the alien mother again, her arms still wrapped around her son. She didn't even try to run. She was ready to die. That was when Elias made his choice. He dropped his rifle on the ground, kicked it away, and said quietly, "Then I quit." The silence that followed was heavy. The other soldiers stared in disbelief. The commander shouted again, "You'll be court-martialed, Elias." Elias didn't answer. He just turned to the woman and whispered, "Follow me." They ran between the ruins as gunfire echoed in the distance, dust and smoke filling the air. The alien mother could barely keep up, clutching her son to her chest. Elias led them through a broken street, past burned vehicles, until they reached an old bunker half buried under rubble. He pushed open a rusted metal door and pulled them inside. Breathing hard inside, it was cold and dark. The walls cracked, old war posters still hanging. Elias found a few candles, lit one, and looked at her again. "You'll be safe here for now," he said. The woman sank to her knees, still holding her child. She whispered, "Why risk your life for us, human?" Elias looked away for a moment, then said quietly, "Because nobody should beg to live." For a long time, neither of them spoke. Outside, thunder rolled, and the sound of distant engines faded. The woman rocked her child to sleep, whispering soft alien words that Elias didn't understand. But her voice was gentle, almost like a song. When the boy finally closed his eyes, she looked at Elias again. "My name is Sarah," she said weakly, "and this is my son Leon." Elias nodded. "I'm Elias." He sat near the door, gun in his lap, listening to the wind outside. Something inside him felt strange, like warmth after a long winter. He had seen too much death, too much hate. But now, in this broken world, he had found something fragile that still wanted to live. The sound of the boy's breathing, the quiet hum of Sarah's voice. It reminded him what it meant to be human. As night fell, Elias whispered to himself, "No one's dying tonight." He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to abandon them, not while he still breathed. And somewhere deep in the dark bunker, Sarah's tears turned into silent hope. For the first time since the war ended, she believed someone might actually save them. The night was cold. The bunker smelled of dust and old metal. Elias sat near the broken door, gun across his knees, his eyes half open but his mind wide awake. The alien mother, Sarah, lay in the corner, her son wrapped in a torn blanket. The candle flickered weakly between them, throwing long shadows on the cracked wall. Every sound outside made Elias tense. Every whisper of wind sounded like boots. He had broken the rules, abandoned his unit, and helped an alien. That meant only one thing. If the patrols found them, they would shoot him on sight. Still, when Elias looked at the sleeping boy, he knew he had made the right choice. The boy's breathing was shallow but steady, and the faint color had returned to his gray skin. In the morning, Sarah woke before the sun, her long white hair tangled with dust. She touched her son's forehead and smiled weakly. "His fever is gone," she whispered. Elias nodded, his voice low. "Good, we'll keep him that way." He handed her another ration bar and she froze again as if afraid to take it. "You should eat," he said. "You need strength." She looked away, ashamed. "I don't deserve your food," Elias sighed. "You're a mother, and your son is still breathing, that's all that matters." She finally took the food and broke it into small pieces. Giving most to the boy, Elias pretended not to notice, but he smiled quietly. There was something pure in the way she cared, something he hadn't seen in years. Hours passed. The bunker stayed silent. Outside, the sky turned red from the rising sun. Elias peeked through a small crack in the wall. He could see smoke trails far away. Probably human patrols scanning the area. They would soon discover the missing soldier, maybe even trace his tracks. He knew they had to move, but Sarah and her son were too weak to travel far. That evening, thunder rolled again. A storm was coming. Elias gathered a few metal sheets to cover the broken roof. While he worked, Sarah watched him silently. She had never seen a human build anything with such care. Most humans she knew had destroyed, not protected. She finally asked, "Why do you do this, Elias? Why help the enemy?" He paused, looking at her, his hands covered in dust. "Because I stopped seeing enemies," he said softly. "All I see is a woman trying to save her child." Her lips trembled, her eyes filled with tears. "Humans burned our fields," she said. "They left us to starve." Elias didn't look away. "And your people bombed our colonies. Both sides lost something, both forgot mercy." She said nothing after that. Only silence remained, broken by the distant sound of thunder and the faint heartbeat of the boy asleep beside her. Later that night, the storm hit. Rain poured through the cracks, lightning flashed across the sky. Sarah screamed when a bolt struck nearby, shaking the bunker. Elias pulled her close, shielding her and the boy under his coat. "It's just the storm," he said calmly, but his voice was shaking too. She looked up at him, her eyes glowing faintly blue in the dark. "Your heart is strong," she whispered, "but you are afraid." He chuckled softly. "Only fools aren't afraid." When the storm finally passed, the world outside was quiet again. Water dripped from the roof. The smell of wet earth filled the bunker. Elias sat back against the wall, exhausted. His head fell forward as he dozed off. In his sleep, he dreamed of his own sister, a little girl who had died when their city was attacked. He saw her face, thin and pale like Sarah's son when he woke. His chest ached with the memory. He looked over and saw Sarah watching him. She had been awake the whole time. "You spoke her name," she said softly. "Who was she?" Elias swallowed hard. "My sister. She was 6 when they bombed our colony. Sarah lowered her eyes, guilt washing over her face. I'm sorry, she whispered. Maybe my people were part of that. He shook his head. It doesn't matter now. What matters is the living. As the days passed, Elias repaired the bunker bit by bit, found a small water filter, made traps for food. Sarah began to help, her alien hands surprisingly skilled. She even smiled once when the trap caught a small rodent. They cooked it together, sharing pieces in silence. For the first time in months, both laughed quietly when the boy tried to chase the shadow of the flame on the wall. But the peace didn't last long. On the 4th night, Elias heard distant engines again. He climbed up through a broken air vent and saw lights. Military search drones sweeping the ruins. His heart sank. He rushed back inside. They're close, he said. We have to move before they scan this area. Sarah clutched her son, fear in her eyes. I can't run fast. Elias put his hand on her shoulder. Then I'll carry him. They packed what little they had, half a ration bar, a water bottle, a blanket, and stepped out into the rain-soaked ruins. Lightning flashed again, illuminating the distant metal glint of a drone. Elias whispered, Stay low. They moved between rubble, their feet splashing through puddles. Sarah's son began to cough, and the sound made Elias freeze. He could see a drone turning toward them, its red eye scanning. Without thinking, Elias grabbed Sarah and her son, dragging them into an old sewer hatch. They fell into the dark as a beam of light passed above. The sound of engines faded again. Sarah trembled, clutching Elias's arm. You saved us again, she whispered. No, he said quietly, catching his breath. I just did what anyone should do. In the dim light below, Sarah looked at him, her voice trembling. Then maybe, not all humans are monsters. Elias looked back at her, his face calm but his eyes tired. And maybe not all aliens are enemies, he said. And for the first time, both of them smiled at the same time in that dark tunnel. Something small but powerful was born. Trust. Fragile like the flame of a candle, but strong enough to survive the darkness ahead. The tunnel was dark and wet. Drops of water fell from the ceiling, each sound echoing like footsteps in the distance. Elias walked ahead with a small flashlight, his face covered in dirt and sweat. Behind him, Sarah held her son close, her eyes glowing faintly blue in the dim light. Every few seconds she turned her head, afraid that something was following them. For 2 days they had moved through the old sewer tunnels under the city. The smell was awful, but it was safer than the surface. Above them, the sky belonged to drones, scanners, and soldiers who would kill Elias for helping the enemy. The boy coughed softly, the sound too weak to travel far, yet enough to make Elias tense every time. They finally reached a broken metal door leading to the old maintenance chamber. It was small, filled with dusty tools and pipes. Elias used his knife to pry the lock open. The door creaked. They slipped inside. He sealed it shut from the inside and sighed in relief. We'll rest here for a while, he said. Sarah lowered her son gently to the floor, covering him with a blanket, then sat across from Elias. She looked at him silently for a moment, then asked, Why risk everything for us? Her voice was calm but curious. Elias didn't answer right away. He just stared at the flickering light on the wall. Finally he said, Because once someone risked everything for me, and I didn't deserve it either. She tilted her head. Was it your sister? He nodded. She saved me when the bombs fell, pushed me under the table before the blast hit. She didn't make it. Sarah looked down, her voice soft. My husband was killed too. He tried to fight for food and the guards shot him. There was silence for a long time. The only sound was the drip of water and the slow breathing of her child. Elias reached into his pack and pulled out a small metal disc, a beacon, the one he had used to contact his squad. He held it in his hand for a while, then crushed it under his boot. Sparks flew. Sarah gasped. That was your link to your people? Elias looked at her and said, I don't have people anymore. Later that night, while Sarah slept beside her son, Elias quietly explored the chamber. On one side he found an old control panel still glowing faintly. Screens flickered with alien symbols and half-broken warnings. He brushed off the dust and muttered, This isn't human tech. The system beeped, strange blue light spreading across the floor. Sarah woke and saw the glow. Her eyes widened. What did you do? Elias stepped back. I just touched the screen. She rushed forward, touching the control panel with both hands. The symbols shifted, changing into her language. This was one of our energy conduits, she said. her voice shaking. Before the war, this city was powered by a living core underground, Elias frowned. Living core? Sarah nodded. It's like a heart, an energy being that gives warmth and power. It was buried during the war. She looked around the room. If it still lives, it could save hundreds. It could heal our people. Elias looked doubtful. And if it doesn't? Sarah smiled faintly. Then we die trying. But before they could say anything else, Elias heard a sharp sound, boots, distant but real, echoing from the tunnels. He grabbed his rifle, motioning for silence. Sarah covered her son's mouth. The footsteps grew louder, then stopped right outside the door. Elias turned off the flashlight, his finger on the trigger. A voice came through the metal, rough and cold. Elias Carter, you are charged with treason. It was his old commander, the same man who had ordered him to leave Sarah behind. Come out now and you might live. Elias's heart pounded. He looked at Sarah. She shook her head, terrified. If they find us, Elias whispered, they won't. He pulled a grenade from his vest, twisted the pin halfway and threw it down the tunnel through a vent. The explosion roared, filling the air with dust and screams. He turned to Sarah. We move now. She grabbed her son and followed him into the maintenance shaft behind the chamber. They ran through the tunnels as smoke chased them. The child coughing, Sarah stumbling but refusing to fall. When they finally stopped, the air was thin. Elias leaned against the wall, breathing hard. They'll search every tunnel now, he said. We need a new hiding place. Sarah nodded, her eyes glowing again. But this time not from fear, from something deeper. She placed her palm on the wall, whispering words in her alien language. Suddenly, blue light pulsed through the metal like veins coming alive. Elias stepped back, startled. What are you doing? She looked at him, her voice trembling. I'm calling the core. The ground vibrated, faintly at first, then stronger. The pipes hummed. The walls shone with faint warmth. Elias stared in disbelief. You can talk to it? Sarah turned to him, her face glowing softly. Our kind was born with a link to energy. It listens when we call. It remembers when we suffer. She smiled sadly. And it hates war. Elias felt the heat in the air, like a heartbeat beneath the city. For a moment the child opened his eyes, his color returning, the warmth washing over him. Then the light dimmed again. Sarah collapsed, breathing heavily. Elias caught her before she hit the ground. Hey, stay with me, she smiled weakly. The core is alive, but it's dying, buried deep. Elias looked at her and said, Then we're going to find it. She blinked, surprised. You'd do that? Elias nodded. You saved me too many times already. Now it's my turn. She reached up and touched his hand, her voice barely a whisper. You're not like the others? Elias smiled faintly. I'm just human, she whispered back. That's what makes you different. And for the first time, she believed that maybe a human could be the key to saving not just her son, but her entire dying world. Outside, the echoes of soldiers still filled the tunnels, but deep below in the glowing darkness, two enemies had just become something far more dangerous together. Hope. The rain returned before sunset, heavy and sharp like falling shards of glass. Thunder rolled across the broken city as if the heavens themselves were angry. Elias carried Sarah in his arms through the dark tunnels. Her body weak, her face pale, her son clinging to his back. Every step echoed with fear and exhaustion. The walls shook from distant explosions above. They reached a cracked steel door and pushed through into a hollow chamber filled with dripping water and rusted machines. Elias lowered Sarah gently onto the floor, her chest rising slowly. He could feel the heat still pulsing through the metal under their feet, the faint heartbeat of the ancient alien core somewhere deep below. Sarah tried to sit up, whispering, It's close. I can feel it, but Elias shook his head. You need to rest. We'll look for it tomorrow. She gave him a weak smile. Tomorrow is not promised. Human. Elias looked away, his jaw tightening. Then I'll make sure it comes. He started sealing the door with old metal rods, then built a small fire in a corner using broken wood and cloth. The flickering light filled the chamber. Painting shadows on the walls, the little boy sat beside his mother. Holding her hand tightly, Elias watched them for a moment, and the image reminded him of something he hadn't seen since childhood. Family. The kind that had been stolen by war. Outside, the storm screamed. The sound of wind mixed with distant voices. Metallic and harsh, Elias froze. Search party, he muttered. He ran to the small window crack and looked out. Through the rain, he could see glowing orbs of drones hovering over the ruins. Lights sweeping back and forth, armored figures moving between broken pillars. They were close, too close. He turned back to Sarah. They found us again. She sat up despite her weakness, her eyes glowing softly in the firelight. Then we fight. Elias frowned. You can barely stand, she smiled faintly. I don't need to stand to protect my son. Elias loaded his rifle. His hands moving fast and practiced, he checked his grenades. 2 left. Half a clip of ammo, not much, he whispered. If they break through, I'll draw them away. You stay hidden. Sierra's voice sharpened. No, you won't die for us, he met her gaze. I'm not dying, I'm just buying time. Lightning flashed. And the first explosion hit the door. Metal bent inward, sparks flew. The boy screamed. Elias pushed him and Sarah behind the fire pit. Cover your ears, he said. Another blast, the door burst open. 3 soldiers stormed in with rifles raised, red beams cutting through smoke. Elias didn't hesitate, he rolled to the side and fired. 2 soldiers fell instantly. The third ducked behind a wall and fired back. Bullets tore through pipes, spraying steam. Sarah shouted something in her language, and a burst of blue light shot from her hands, hitting the soldier's weapon. The metal melted and dropped, glowing to the floor. The man screamed. Elias looked at her in shock. You didn't tell me you could do that. She was shaking, her skin glowing faintly. I can't control it for long, she whispered. The energy hurts me too. Elias turned back toward the smoke, his mind racing. Then save it for when we really need it. More footsteps outside, more voices, target confirmed. 1 human traitor and 2 hostiles. The commander's voice boomed through the comms. Elias clenched his teeth, that voice, he knew it. It was his old commander. You still alive, Elias? The man shouted. You're throwing your life away for alien trash, Elias shouted back. I'm saving what's left of it, and opened fire again. The battle raged for minutes. Flashes of light, smoke, the stench of burning metal. Sarah crawled toward the door, whispering something under her breath. Her palms pressed against the floor, and suddenly the ground pulsed. A shockwave of blue light rolled outward, knocking the soldiers back, their weapons shutting down instantly. Elias stared at her, eyes wide. What did you just do? She whispered, trembling. I borrowed from the core. Then she collapsed completely. Elias rushed to her side. Her pulse was weak. He lifted her head. Stay with me, Sarah. Come on. She looked at him through half-closed eyes and whispered, Don't let them take my son. He looked toward the entrance, smoke and rain mixing in the air. The remaining soldiers were regrouping, the commander shouting orders, Flush them out. Elias clenched his fists, his heart racing. He knew they couldn't run this time. Not with Sarah unconscious. Not with the child crying. He took a deep breath, pressed his forehead to hers, and whispered, I promised you tomorrow. So you'll have it. He grabbed his rifle and stepped into the open rain. Bullets slicing past him. He moved like a ghost through the smoke, precise and fast. Each shot finding its mark, he shouted once. A raw sound that echoed through the ruins. You want me? Come get me! The commander stepped forward, aiming a plasma rifle, but before he could fire, the ground beneath them glowed bright blue. The air thickened and a deep humming sound filled the chamber. Elias turned and saw the floor crack open slightly. Light spilling through the gaps, the core alive and angry. Lightning struck the city above, connecting with the glowing light below. A storm of energy exploded outward. Drones fried, weapons melted, soldiers screamed and fled. Elias stood frozen, watching the power ripple through the rain like living fire. When the light finally faded, he fell to his knees, panting, the rain washing blood and dirt from his face. He crawled back to the bunker. Sarah and her son were alive, the boy clutching her hand tightly, her eyes fluttered open. Is it over? She whispered. Elias nodded weakly. For now, she smiled faintly, her fingers brushing his cheek. You fought like the storm itself, he laughed softly. You should see the storm complain. She chuckled weakly, then closed her eyes again. Elias leaned back against the wall, holding his rifle tight. As thunder rolled again outside, the storm finally began to fade, but inside that ruined city, something far more powerful had been born. Not just survival, but unity, the kind that no war could kill. And as Elias sat beside them, guarding the sleeping mother and child, he realized he wasn't just protecting them anymore. He was protecting the last spark of what made humanity worth saving. The morning after the storm was silent. No gunfire, no thunder, just the soft dripping of rain from the broken roof above. Elias opened his eyes to a dim light spreading across the cracked floor. Smoke still floated in the air, and the air smelled like wet earth and metal. He sat up slowly, his muscles stiff, his clothes still damp, his ears ringing from the night before. Sarah was lying near the wall, her skin pale and cold, but her chest rose and fell slowly beside her. The boy slept curled against her arm, his small hand gripping the edge of Elias's jacket. Elias watched the child's face for a long moment, and for the first time since he left the army, a small tired smile crossed his lips. He stepped outside the bunker, and looked toward the horizon. The city lay in ruins. Smoke rose from the east where the battle had been. The commander and his men were gone. Dead or retreating, he didn't care, for now they were free. He took a deep breath, feeling the cold wind hit his face. It carried the smell of life and death mixed together. When he went back inside, Sarah was awake. She looked at him weakly and whispered, "We survived." Elias nodded. Barely. She tried to sit up but winced, her arms trembling. "The Corps protected us," she said. "It answered when I called." Elias crouched beside her. "Whatever it did, it nearly killed you." She smiled faintly. "Sometimes saving others costs something." Her son woke with a soft cough, his eyes glowing faint blue, the same color as the light that had exploded last night. Elias noticed it and froze. His eyes, he muttered. They weren't that bright before. Sarah looked at her son, her face filled with quiet fear. "The Corps touched him too," she said softly. "He's connected now." The boy looked up at Elias and smiled, weak but genuine, then said a single word that made both adults freeze. "Dad?" Elias blinked, unsure if he heard right. Sarah's eyes widened. She whispered, "He's never spoken that word before." Elias knelt down, trying to smile. "Hey kid, it's okay. I'm not—" But the boy crawled into his arms and hugged him, small hands gripping tightly around his neck. "Dad," he said again, his voice shaking, and something deep inside Elias cracked open. He held the boy close, his throat tight, unable to speak after a long silence. He whispered, "It's okay, kid, I got you." Sarah watched quietly. Tears gathering in her eyes, she turned away, covering her mouth. The scene in front of her hurt and healed her at the same time. For the next few days they stayed hidden, rebuilding a small shelter near the ruins. Elias repaired an old generator. Sarah helped him grow moss and fungus that glowed faintly, alien plants she could still summon. The boy laughed when the lights flickered, and for a brief moment it felt like a home. Every night Elias told stories from his world, about blue oceans and old earth forests. Sarah listened closely, eyes wide. "Humans lived like that once?" she asked. Elias nodded. "Before we turned everything into war." She looked down. "My people did the same." One night, while the boy slept, Sarah whispered, "You changed him." Elias looked confused. "Your son?" She nodded. "Yes, but not just him. You changed what he will believe about your kind." "And mine?" Elias chuckled softly. "I just gave him food?" She shook her head. "No, you gave him trust." The next morning, Elias woke to find the boy gone. Panic shot through him. He rushed outside and saw tiny footprints leading up the hill behind the ruins. He followed fast, calling softly, "Leon, where are you?" Then he stopped. The boy was standing on a rock, staring at a broken power tower, his small hands glowing blue. The metal around the tower began to bend and hum, sparks dancing in the air. Elias shouted, "Leon, stop!" He ran forward, grabbing the boy and pulling him back just before the whole structure collapsed with a crash. Sarah came running, her face pale. "He's not controlling it, it's the Corps." "It's using him." Leon started crying, scared. "I didn't mean to, Dad, I didn't mean to." Elias held him close. It's okay. You're safe." Sarah knelt beside them, her hands glowing faintly. She touched the boy's chest, her voice low. "The bond between him and the Corps is growing stronger. It's dangerous. If they sense it, they'll come again." Elias looked at her. "Then we'll go before they do." Sarah shook her head. "No, we can't run forever. The Corps is calling him. It needs balance if it dies. Both our worlds die with it." Elias frowned. "Then what do we do?" Sarah looked at him, her eyes glowing softly. "We have to reach the heart of the city, the central chamber where the Corps was sealed during the war." Elias's face hardened. "That's suicide. It's under the human fortress," she nodded. "Yes, but it's also the only way." He looked at Leon, who was still crying softly, then at Sarah. "You really think the boy can help it?" She whispered, "No, I think the Corps chose him." That night, as the storm clouds gathered again, Elias couldn't sleep. He sat by the fire, staring at the boy sleeping peacefully beside Sarah. He thought about what the child had called him, about the warmth of that small voice in the middle of all the chaos. And for the first time in his life, he felt fear not for himself, but for someone else. He whispered into the dark, "I'm not a hero. I'm not even a father." But the words didn't sound true anymore, because deep down he knew he had already accepted the truth, that the boy had filled the empty place in his heart that the war had hollowed out. When dawn came, he looked at Sarah and said quietly, "We go at night when the scanners are low." She nodded, her eyes shining in the morning light, and for a brief second, Elias thought she looked like the sunrise itself, fragile but unbroken. As they packed what little they had, Leon ran up and tugged Elias's hand. "Dad, will you protect us again?" Elias knelt down, smiled faintly, and said, "Always." And when they stepped into the cold wind together, he realized that this journey wasn't just about saving a dying world anymore. It was about saving the small family that had somehow become his own. Night crept slowly over the dead city. The ruins glowed faintly from the storm clouds above. Lightning flickered across shattered towers, and the air was thick with the smell of rust and fear. Elias walked in silence, his boots crunching over debris, his rifle strapped to his back. Behind him, Sarah carried her sleeping son wrapped in a blanket of alien fabric that shimmered faintly in the dark. They were heading toward the old human fortress, the same place Elias once called home. Now it was enemy ground. But somewhere beneath that iron structure lay the core, the living heart of both their worlds, the one thing that could end the war or end everything. Elias's jaw was tight, his eyes cold. He knew the fortress defenses, knew every trap, every tunnel, and he knew there would be no way back once they entered. Sarah walked beside him, her steps slow but steady, the glow of her eyes lighting their way. She whispered softly, "The closer we get, the stronger the energy feels." Elias nodded. "Good. That means it's still alive." She looked at him, her voice quiet but sharp. "And it means they'll be waiting." Elias gave a faint smile. "They always are." They reached the edge of the outer wall just before midnight. Rain began to fall again, heavy and cold. Elias led them through a drainage tunnel he used years ago during a siege. The metal walls hummed faintly from the storm above. Sarah's son stirred in her arms, his small hands glowing faint blue. Elias glanced back, whispering, "Keep him quiet." "The scanners pick up movement." Sarah nodded, holding her child close, whispering lullabies in a language that sounded like wind. When they reached the inner gate, Elias stopped. He knelt beside the panel and pulled out a small metal tool. The door hissed, locked tight. "Still works," he muttered, "but it needs a code." He placed his hand on the scanner. Nothing. Red light flashed. Denied. Suddenly, Sarah stepped forward and pressed her palm to the same panel. Her skin glowed and the light shifted to blue. The door slid open with a deep hum. Elias stared at her. "How?" She smiled faintly. "The core recognizes both worlds now. It listens to whoever carries truth." Elias chuckled softly. That's one way to describe breaking and entering. Inside the fortress, everything was quiet. Too quiet. The hallways were filled with the ghosts of war. Bullet holes, broken signs, old banners half burned. Elias walked carefully, checking corners. But something felt wrong. Too easy, too empty. And then, from above, a voice echoed through the speakers, deep and cold. "You came back, soldier." Elias froze. The voice belonged to the commander, the same man who hunted them since the day in the desert road. "You should have stayed dead," the voice said. "Now I'll bury you with your pets." Red lights flashed on the ceiling. Alarm screamed. Metal doors slammed shut behind them. Sarah gasped, "We're trapped!" Elias grabbed her hand. "No, not yet." He ran forward, dragging her through a narrow corridor. Gunfire erupted from both sides, bullets hitting walls. Sparks flying, Elias fired back, precise, fast. Soldiers fell one after another, but more kept coming. Sarah covered her son with her cloak, whispering protective words. Blue symbols glowing faintly on the air around them. They reached the central chamber, a massive round room glowing from the floor below. Through the cracks, Elias saw light moving like liquid fire. The core was beneath them, sealed under layers of steel and code. Sarah stepped to the center, her eyes glowing bright. "I can open it," she whispered, "but it will draw them here." Elias looked at her. "Then we hold them here." She placed her palms on the floor. The symbols flared. Lines of blue light spread across the metal like veins coming alive. The air vibrated. Machines began to hum, and far below, something enormous stirred. Then the doors burst open. Dozens of soldiers stormed in, rifles raised, the commander at the front in his dark armor. "Traitor!" he shouted. "You'll die a coward's death." Elias aimed his rifle and shouted back, "I already did. This time I die for something that matters." Gunfire roared. Elias moved like a shadow, firing, reloading, ducking behind cover. Explosions rocked the room. The boy screamed as a blast tore through the wall. Sarah didn't stop, her voice rising louder, the ground shaking beneath her feet, the metal glowing hotter, the core responding to her call. The commander charged forward, shooting wildly, shouting, "You think you can save them? You're just one man." Elias stood tall amid the chaos, eyes cold, voice steady. That's what humans do best. And he fired one last shot. Hitting the fuel tank beside the commander, the explosion threw both of them backward. Flames filled the chamber. Sarah screamed his name, but Elias pushed himself up, half his face covered in soot, blood dripping from his temple. "Finish it!" he shouted. "Open it now!" Sarah's hands glowed brighter, her voice echoing like a storm. The floor split open, light bursting through, so bright it blinded everyone. The soldiers screamed and fell back. The commander disappeared into the fire. Elias stumbled toward her, the wind of energy tearing through his clothes. He could barely hear anything except the heartbeat of the core itself, deep, thunderous, alive. He reached her just as she fell to her knees, the boy glowing like a small sun in her arms. The core's voice was not sound but feeling, it spoke in their hearts. Life joined with life. War ends where love begins. Elias fell beside them, his hand on Sarah's shoulder, his eyes filled with light. The fortress began to collapse, pillars crumbling, alarms fading into silence. Outside, the storm broke apart, light flooding the ruins like morning. Sarah opened her eyes and saw Elias smiling faintly. Barely conscious, "We did it," she whispered. He nodded weakly. "Told you. I'd buy time." Then his head fell back against the floor. The last thing he heard before darkness took him was Sarah's voice, trembling with both grief and awe. "You weren't just human, Elias. You were hope." The city was silent when dawn came. Smoke still curled toward the pale sky. The storm had ended, and the battlefield was no longer a place of war but of memory. The old fortress stood half-collapsed, its steel walls torn apart, and from beneath the wreckage came a faint glow, the living light of the core, pulsing like a heartbeat that refused to die. Sarah opened her eyes slowly. Her vision blurred, everything hurt. The air was heavy with dust and warmth. Beside her lay her son, Leon, still breathing. Still glowing faint blue, she turned her head and saw Elias, motionless among the ruins, his hand still stretched out toward her as if trying to protect them even in death. Her breath caught, her heart broke. "Elias," she whispered, crawling toward him, her fingers trembling as they touched his face, cold but peaceful. Tears filled her eyes. "You promised tomorrow," she said softly, her voice shaking. "You can't leave us before it comes," but he didn't move. Around them the floor hummed, faint light from the awakened core spreading across the ruins like veins of fire. Sarah looked down as her son stirred, his voice small and weak. "Mom, where's Dad?" She froze, every word cut deeper than a blade. She pulled him close. "He's sleeping, my heart." He made sure we're safe, but the core was not silent. The air shimmered, and a voice, soft, deep, familiar, spoke in her mind, "Human life, offered freely. Life returns freely." The ground beneath Elias began to glow. A golden light wrapping around his body, Sarah gasped, holding her breath as the light grew brighter. Leanne reached out his tiny hand, placing it over Elias's heart. "Please wake up, Dad," he whispered, tears rolling down his cheeks. "You said you'd protect us," and suddenly, the core responded, its glow flaring across the whole chamber, a low hum turning into a heartbeat. Slow but steady, Elias's chest moved once, then again Sarah sobbed, covering her mouth as his eyes fluttered open. He gasped, coughing, his voice rough. "I told you I'd keep my word." She laughed and cried at the same time, holding his face in both hands. "You stubborn human." He smiled weakly. "Been called worse." When Elias sat up, the fortress was quiet again. The battle sounds gone. The light of the core had spread across the sky, flowing through broken towers, seeping into the streets, healing the ground itself. Plants began to grow from the cracks, green vines, blue flowers glowing softly. The air smelled clean for the first time in years. Sarah stared in awe. "It's restoring the planet," she whispered. Elias looked around. "Guess it didn't want to die after all." She smiled faintly. It needed faith. Days passed, and word spread across both worlds. Human scouts returned to the ruins, finding the war over, finding something impossible. The air breathable again, water flowing through the cracked pipes. alien refugees emerging from underground tunnels, human survivors lowering their weapons in confusion and wonder. Elias helped rebuild the first shelter beside the glowing crater that once was the fortress. Sarah taught the humans how to use the energy of the core safely. Her son ran between workers from both species, laughing, carrying food, shouting words in both languages. No one called him an alien or a hybrid. They just called him a child. At night, when the campfire burned and the stars finally appeared without smoke to hide them, Elias sat quietly, polishing his old rifle. Sarah sat beside him, her head resting on his shoulder. "The humans look at me differently now," she said softly. "Not with fear, but with curiosity." Elias chuckled. "That's how it starts, curiosity first, then chaos. Then dinner invitations," she laughed softly. "You joke too much for a man who died once," he smirked. "Can't waste my second life being serious." Their son, Leon, sat by the fire staring at the stars. "Mom, Dad," he said, his voice full of wonder. "Do you think the core is still awake?" Elias looked at the glowing hills in the distance, where faint light pulsed under the earth. "Oh yeah, kid, it's awake, watching us. Probably shaking its head already." Leon giggled. "Because you talk too much?" Elias laughed. "Exactly that," Sarah smiled. Watching them, her heart warm. "He's more human than alien now," she whispered. Elias turned to her. "No, he's better than both. He's the bridge." Time passed. The camp grew into a small village. Humans and aliens building side by side. Laughter and music echoing through places once filled with screams. The banners of both species hung together for the first time, and every night, the core's soft light rose from the earth like a second moon. One evening, Sarah walked to the ridge overlooking the city. The wind gentle, the sky filled with orange clouds. She felt a hand slip into hers, Elias standing beside her. The sunset reflected in his tired but calm eyes. "Hard to believe this used to be a battlefield," he said quietly. She nodded. "You turned it into a home." He shook his head. "We did." They stood in silence for a while. The sound of laughter drifting up from below. Their son chasing fireflies near the rebuilt well. The light of the core pulsing in rhythm with his laughter. And for the first time in forever, peace didn't feel like a dream. It was real. Sarah turned to Elias and whispered, "Do you regret it?" He frowned softly. "What?" She smiled faintly, breaking the rules. "Saving us." He looked at her and said simply, "If I hadn't, I'd still be alive, but I wouldn't be living." She leaned her head against his shoulder. "Humans," she murmured, "so strange, so stubborn, so full of love." As night fell, the stars blinked awake brighter than ever. Elias wrapped his arm around her, whispering, "You see that one?" He pointed to the brightest star in the sky. "That's where it all started," she smiled. "Then let it shine forever." Below them, the village lights glowed like constellations on the ground. The core pulsed softly beneath the earth, alive and peaceful, and in that moment one human, one alien, and one child stood as proof that no war, no hatred, no darkness could ever silence the simple power of compassion. Because in the end, the world didn't survive through strength or fear. It survived because one starving mother cried for help, and one human answered.